operations center in West Kennebunk. We have about 160 people out of this operations center, and we're down to a workforce of about 38 or 39. Everyone else is working from home, so it's actually worked really well. The transition's gone just fine so far, and things are good here. We're extremely busy, which we'll talk about with the PPP loans right now, but otherwise I think things are going as smoothly as they can, and I'm pretty proud of our people and what they've done. And I do just want to thank you, Laura, and the Chamber. You've done a terrific job getting information out there to everybody. It's been a great clearinghouse, I think, for all the businesses in town.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. So if it's okay, we'll just go right into the first questions. As a local lender, what advice can you offer to businesses, business owners who are really worried about paying bills, paying the mortgages? Where do they go from here?
I think the first and most important thing is probably just to contact your lender or your local bank that you do business with. A lot of the solutions, we do have sort of a quick product set or set of solutions that we can get to, but everyone has a very unique situation. So it's hard to know exactly what's right for you until we have a discussion with you. So we'll talk about PPP. There's government programs out there. The bank is doing some things. Pretty much all banks out there today are offering some sort of either payment deferment or interest-only options on existing loans. And most banks are offering some options for some additional working capital or lending proceeds for you, whether it's a government loan or a bank-originated loan. So bottom line, give your bank a call. The only plug I'll put in for our lenders is there is an incredible volume out there right now of requests coming in and inquiries and things like that. So a little bit of patience. We're going to get back to everybody as soon as we can. We're pretty much same day, but I just ask for a little bit of patience on us just because of the volumes.
So I guess one of the big questions people have is, do I apply for an SBA EIDL loan? Do I apply for PPP? Can I apply for both? How do people figure that piece of it out?
Sure. So I guess our advice would be for most business owners, at this point in time, we'd advocate that you apply for the PPP loan. You can apply for both loans, the EIDL and the PPP loans, and I'll ask Lex in a second to talk about that, what the implications are if you have applied for both loans. I know the EIDL loans, I know that system hasn't worked great, and I'm still, honestly, I haven't spoken with a borrower yet who's actually received funding on those loans. A lot were able to apply. I know the website was down and that sort of thing. But again, I think the PPP is probably the better thing. I'll also tell you that hot off the press, about an hour ago, the Fed has announced another $2.3 trillion in loan programs and economic stimulus that they're going to be issuing. Lex and I have a very, very long email with a lot of attachments on it regarding the programs, the Main Street loan programs that the Fed is coming out with. So I honestly don't have a lot of detail on that today. So beyond the PPP, which we actually think is a very good program and contains the loan forgiveness, there's a lot of other things coming down the road, options for small businesses. So I don't think anyone should worry about getting some help during this time. Lex, do you want to talk about the EIDL and the PPP co-applications?
Yeah, and I'll just sort of talk high level here. So the EIDL loans were available as soon as an economic disaster had been declared, and these have the EIDL loans have been kind of a program available under the SBA for a while. This particular version is obviously tailored to the COVID-19 pandemic. But so the EIDL loans, the terms are a little bit different, and as Brad mentioned, maybe the biggest difference is an EIDL loan is a direct loan from the SBA, whereas a PPP or paycheck loan is available through a bank and then ultimately approved by the SBA. So for the EIDL loans, the terms are a little bit different. Unlike a PPP loan, which is based on about 2.5 times your monthly payroll, up to 10 million, the EIDL loans are available up to 2 million. They are loans that need to be repaid, except for a $10,000 advance that is made available. The SBA has been saying 3 days, but that program has been a little bit spotty. But that $10,000 is available immediately. As I said, you can apply for both. There's a timing issue here that you're going to be aware of. So if you've applied for an EIDL loan prior to April 3rd, which is when the paycheck loans became available, you can refinance that EIDL loan into a paycheck loan. If you were using the EIDL loan for payroll costs, you need to do that, and that would allow you to be forgiven under the paycheck loan. If you're using EIDL loan proceeds for other things outside of your payroll, you can use that loan and those proceeds for that purpose, and you could have the eligibility for both loans. So that's kind of a high-level overview of the differences between the two programs. We want to drill down maybe a bit more into either. I know we certainly will on the paycheck loans, but that's kind of a high-level overview.
I think an important thing in all of this, and I think probably everybody's seen in the media and just observed it personally, is that this program, all of these programs are evolving, and I can tell you literally hour by hour, we get clarifications, reclarifications, contradictions on things that the SBA and the Treasury have said before on the programs. An example is, you know, they got the applications out initially when they first announced the program before we even knew what to do with the applications. They didn't have that piece settled yet. They figured that piece out a week ago, Thursday night, and let us know what it would be so Friday morning that we could get going on these. And then Thursday night at midnight, they changed the application that they had previously handed out. We had about 200 applications backed up, and had to go back to those customers and have them fill out the new application. So the new one is out there now. So those are the kind of things that are happening literally every single day as we go along. So it's fits and starts, but we think we're in a really good place now. It tends to be rolling. And just to give you an idea, I talked about how busy everybody was. In a typical year, just realize the SBA does between 25 and $30 billion in loans. They're now trying to put out today $349 billion in a matter of a week or two. I can tell you that translates down to Kennebunk Savings. We're a good-sized community bank, and we do a lot of small business lending. We will do as many PPP loans in 1 week as we usually do all of our commercial loans total in a full year. So there's huge strains on all the systems, whether it's the SBA system, whether it's us trying to kind of get through the pipeline here, the big bump in the pipeline. So the money's going to get out there. Everybody's going to get what they qualify for, but there's a lot of stuff going on, I guess.
And I guess maybe I'd add to that. So maybe my biggest takeaway, my biggest recommendation after this call is go to treasury.gov, bookmark that website, and there's a link there that has their updated and evolving guidance on the PPP loans. And as Brad mentioned, they're updating that site daily, sometimes even hourly. So we were in the middle of the day yesterday trying to figure out a particular issue, and we learned of the answer through a couple of channels, but we got definitive guidance through the FAQs that are published on that website. So I would refresh that website, and especially the FAQs on that website. That's where you should go to get the evolving, most recent guidance.
And Lex, there's a link to the interim rule there too, yes?
There is. So just kind of heavy hitters for us in terms of guidance. There's an interim final rule that's published jointly by the Treasury and the SBA. That was the first piece of available guidance to drill down in some of the details. So you want to look at that. The FAQs I mentioned, that's kind of the tool that the SBA and the Treasury are using to update guidance as they determine it and make it available to the public. And the other two documents there that I think are worthwhile, there's a borrower guidance for borrowers document that I would refer you to. That's got some pretty good information about what you need to complete your 2483 application. And that's we can talk more about that, but that's the application you would complete and submit along with your payroll information and documentation to the bank. So those are kind of the 4 primary resources that we've been relying on, and they're being updated in real time, and I would refer back to those as frequently as you see fit.
Thanks. Lex, how do people go about applying for the PPP? Do they just go to their regular banker? Do they need to look elsewhere? And what should they have when they make that decision? What kind of paperwork?
Yep.
So I'll grab the first part of that, Lex.
Yeah, go for it, Brad.
So on the application, you've probably seen, or in the media, you can apply. You can apply to any bank. So any SBA lender bank can process PPP loans. What I will tell you is that because of the sheer volume of applications that are coming through, I can speak to all of the main banks and probably most of the banks across the country. They are prioritizing their own commercial customers first. So if you have a deposit account at a deposit account or commercial lending relationship at an institution, that's going to be your best bet to go to. I think most of the institutions are prioritizing their own customers, and then once they get through those customers, they can start looking to the general public to apply. I am sympathetic. I do know that we have, that there are a number of people out there who may have their loans or their commercial deposit accounts at credit unions, for instance, or maybe they could even be at a bank that doesn't participate in SBA. I'm sympathetic to that. We can get to all of you, but we have to make sure that our customers we've done business with for years can get to the program first. So that's how we're prioritizing it. And then we can move on and open it up to the general public. I'd say we're getting close. The application volume has slowed somewhat, but we still have a pretty significant backlog. And I think you'll find that's the same at just about any bank that you go to.
Yep. And just in terms of the nuts and bolts, the operational details, so most, if not all of you, are familiar with the 2483. So this is the SBA's application form for the paycheck loan, the PPP. There are a few questions on there that you need to answer. The heavy hitters are your average payroll and your eligible loan amount. You do need to identify owners of the business that have a 20% or greater share. So completing that application and including along with the application your payroll documentation and your support. Those are the 2 primary pieces of information you're going to want to have available and ready to go when you contact your lender. I would say the more complete these forms are and the better payroll documentation we have, the quicker the process will go. And we'll talk about this a bit more, but our process in our underwriting and our validation is a relatively narrow review. But if we need to go back with questions and need more payroll documentation or support, that does lengthen the process some. So I would say it's very important. Speak to your lender, have these forms completed, and have that conversation on the front end so we can make sure we have a complete and full package to get underwriting done and then approval through the SBA.
Lex, for businesses that haven't filed their taxes yet this year, whether you're a small business or a sole proprietor, should you use the 2018 taxes? Should you use your estimated 2019 figures? Yeah,
so I'll answer a related question first, and I hope this will help. So when the guidance on this program was published, there was a little bit of ambiguity about the payroll period under which you'd need to submit expenses. So you had one set of guidance that referred to the calendar year 2019, and another set of guidance that referred to the 12 months prior to your application. In the FAQs that have been published by the Treasury, they clarified that, and they essentially said either one of those periods is permissible. So you're going to want to look at your payroll expenses from either calendar year 2019 or the last 12 months prior to submitting your application. So your 2018 numbers are not going to help. It's your 2019 numbers or your most recent 12 months. And there's, we can get into some questions about documentation, and documentation is permissible for payroll, but those are the time periods we need to focus on when we're submitting these applications.
So about how long does it take to apply? You know, if we come in and we get our paperwork and we apply for this loan, how long is that going to take? How long does it take to get approved? And then the biggest question of all, how long before you get your money?
Sure. So I can't quite promise a particular time period or a number, just as Brad mentioned, given the volume, given the rules that have been changing. But maybe if I explain a little bit of the process, that will give you an idea of how long this might take. So assuming we get a completed application, our lender takes that information and submits it to our credit department. Our credit department does a review of the application itself and a review of payroll documentation. Once we have confirmed an eligible payment amount or an eligible loan amount, we then send that information and that application to our SBA team. Here's where you've probably seen in the news that the process can get hung up a bit. So the SBA has a portal for loan approvals called eTran. So as Brad mentioned, that portal is accustomed to handling about 66 billion, in loan approvals per year. We are just blowing that pace out of the water. So that system really at this point hasn't been designed for the type of volume we're seeing. We're having pretty good success at this point with our pace, but what we need to do is take that approval request and from us and get it approved in eTran. So depending on whether the system is working at full capacity and how long it's taking the SBA for approvals through that automated system, that's going to dictate the next step. Once we've received approval, we move to the closing phase. So we learned yesterday that between approval and closing, the Treasury is saying 10 calendar days. So you can expect after your loan is approved, once it is, we'll notify you, one of our lenders will notify you of approval. We'll need to get that loan closed and funded within the next 10 calendar days. So that's a sort of a summary of the process. Much of it depends, frankly, in terms of timing on a properly completed and full application on the front end, and then how quickly we can push that loan through the eTran system. And some of that depends on servers and whether that system is humming along given the volume of requests and approvals.
And I know business customers out there are probably shuddering when they hear that we have to underwrite these, because in normal times a commercial loan can take anywhere from 1 to 3 weeks to underwrite. So this underwriting process that we're doing is quite a bit different. It is really a cursory review of the information that's been submitted. The responsibility for the accuracy of that information is entirely on the customer who is applying. All we're doing is in underwriting is doing a quick sanity test on it. Is the application filled out completely? Has it been signed? And can we quickly take a look at the payroll documentation that has been submitted and come up with at least relatively the same number that you've come up with for the average payroll and the loan amount? So in an ideal world, if we didn't have the volume of applications that we have, that process literally could happen in probably 15, 20 minutes. The underwriter could have it underwritten and passed the SBA, which is in fact probably what's happening. But just realize they've got a stack of applications on their desk like this that they're going through. And then the SBA piece, Lex mentioned, that system up until yesterday has been incredibly unstable at times, meaning that on some days we can get through a lot of applications. However, the last few days, there could be an hour where we can't submit anything. So that really slows things down. So again,
Yeah.
kind of patience in all this, and the money's going to get there. And I know one of the other questions out there is there enough money to fund this program? So there's $349 billion that was set aside for it. The SBA until yesterday was giving us updates on how much of that money had been used. It was going at what I would say is a fairly reasonable pace that made us pretty comfortable that we're going to get all of our applications in. Someone somewhere at the SBA decided that that wasn't such a great idea, so they've stopped actually announcing what that number is. I think people were maybe panicking a little bit. But again, based on the pace and the number that we've seen leading up until yesterday, it looks reasonable. You may have also seen yesterday that the Congress is working on funding that program another $200 billion. If and when it does, everyone's going to get the loans that they need. And then I mentioned at the beginning of the call today, the Fed announcing a $2.3 trillion total loan package, not just loans, but other stimulus packages. So I'm pretty confident that if you need money to get through the next 8 weeks, 12 weeks, something like that, or perhaps even beyond with the Fed program, that we're going to get to you and you're going to get the funding that you need.
Brad, a quick clarification. I know you said it can take the 10 days to get the funding. Is that because you're waiting for the Treasury to do their part, or are you waiting for local funds to be available?
Neither, really. It's the 10 days is really just the pipeline it's going to take us through. I don't want to commit us to this, and I'll probably have people around here, shooting arrows at me. But once you get a call from Kennebunk Savings, from your lender, saying you're approved for the program, once we get this up and running on the documentation side, I wouldn't expect it to take more than 3 or 4 days at the most to get you the documentation and the loan funded. The thing to realize is we didn't have guidance from the SBA until, actually we had conflicting guidance up until yesterday on what we could actually use for a promissory note. They kept flip-flopping on us. We finally got the final guidance on yesterday on what to put together for a note. So that's why right now we've got, I don't know how many, 8 or 10 people out there starting to crank out promissory notes based on the approvals that we've done.
Yeah, and following up on that, Brad, so the 10 days that I spoke about, that's the maximum amount of time we can wait between approval by the SBA and closing and disbursement. I'll tell you, and I'll probably get the arrows as well, our closing team is dating our documents the next business day after we've generated them. So in all likelihood, once the documents are ready, and as Brad mentioned, once we pour through the pile, each time we complete a document, for us, I'd expect it to close the next business day. It just depends on when those loan documents get into the queue of our closing team, but that's how rapidly this is kind of moving through the system.
And the only other thing I'll mention too is all the stuff we're saying is sort of Kennebunk Savings specific, but I could tell you we're members of the Maine Bankers Association. I'm on CEO calls with all the other Maine bankers every couple of days. I'm also on the American Bankers Association National Board, so I talk to a lot of bankers from across the country, and everything we're talking to you about turnaround times and pipeline and volumes and how we're approaching the program, it's really very similar from bank to bank. There aren't a lot of differences from how we're trying to get this done. And I'll also tell you that all the banks have been incredibly cooperative with each other. We realize how important this is for all of our customers, all of our small businesses, and all our communities. So we're trying really hard to share best practices to get the money out the door as fast as we can.
In terms of the PPP loans, can you speak to how people or you decide with businesses how much they're eligible for and what those terms might be?
Yeah, so maybe the first one, especially for our community, I want to speak just a little bit about seasonal businesses. So in calculating your payroll, there are 2 options. So if you choose not to be calculated as a seasonal business, it's the prior, as I mentioned, it's the prior 12 months or the year 2019. If you're a seasonal business, you can use February, and I believe it's February 15th of 2019 through June 30th of 2019. The February date, you can also choose March, so it's February or March of 2019 through June 30th of 2019. You can use that period of time as your payroll calculation period, and so that's a discretionary choice if you're a seasonal business. In terms of how these loans will be documented, I think as many of you know, the interest rate is 1%. The term is 2 years. There's a 6-month deferral period. So those are sort of the highlights. After your deferral period, the loans will be fully amortizing. So it's a principal and interest fully amortizing loan over the next 18 months. And the question there is if you get to that. So the hope would be if you're eligible for forgiveness after the 8 weeks following your funding and disbursement, that's the period at which you'd be eligible to apply to us through the SBA for forgiveness. And I know there'll probably be lots of questions about forgiveness rules. We have some information at this point, but forgiveness rules are sort of still yet to be delineated and determined. So we'll do our best to answer questions about forgiveness. What I do know, what I can tell you at this point, is 75% of the proceeds of this loan need to be used for payroll expenses. The remaining 25% can be used for other eligible expenses. Those include things like rent, utilities, and mortgage interest. So at a high level, that's the way forgiveness will work in terms of how you use those proceeds. I think that's sort of an overview of both the loan itself and forgiveness.
And so ideally, 18 months obviously sounds like a really quick amortization with a big payment, but ideally under this program, when you get to that point, all or the vast majority of your loan balance will have been forgiven. So that balance that actually amortizes out, if any, is going to be relatively small.
If you have applied for an EIDL loan as well as this loan, do you know, like if you choose to take only the, I think it's up to $10,000 will be forgiven piece. First, I don't know if you can speak to that at all, because we've heard some conflicting reports on that too, that it's not that every business gets 10,000. A lot of it is dependent on your number of employees. Can you just keep that portion of it and not take the rest of a loan you're approved for? And does the same go for this?
So I'll give you my understanding of the guidance, and as you mentioned, there is some, I think there's some ambiguity, and there's probably some conflicting reports on this. I think what you may have mentioned is on a call with the Massachusetts SBA district office, they mentioned instead of $10,000 as a grant, it would be based on your number of employees. All I know is that call happened and that report exists. I don't know any more than that. So what I know is the amount that you are eligible for in a grant will be deducted from your forgiveness amount under the paycheck loan. So if you were eligible for a $10,000 grant and you received that, that you essentially you can't double dip. So your $10,000 or your grant money would be deducted from your forgiveness amount under a paycheck loan. So that's there is certainly some ambiguity about how that $10,000 maximum grant gets calculated. The best information I can give you is what I've heard through reporting and what I know to be the terms of the program, and that's sort of what I outlined just now.
That's part of the problem too, just in terms of communication. So just realize there's the DC SBA office, and then every state has their own district office. So, and many of you know, we have branches in Maine and New Hampshire, so we're kind of tied into both of those district offices. And we can tell you that each day, the two states will post conflicting information either with each other or with what DC has told us. We always defer to what DC tells us because ultimately they're going to be the ultimate authority. The states may have some insider information or have information ahead of time, but until we hear it from Washington, that's who we defer to.
Okay.
One other feature I can tell you about the EIDL loans is if you apply, the rule, as I understand it, is whether you are approved for that loan or not, you are eligible for the grant. So that's something to keep in mind. You know, how quickly they are moving forward with those and funding those grants is sort of an open question at this point. But your grant eligibility is not dependent on whether you are approved for a loan by the SBA.
Okay. I have a couple of kind of more specific questions as far as the PPP loan goes. Are a company's health and dental premiums, any of those expenses included as part of the wages?
Yes, so what I can tell you is, and maybe the best resource here, on the Treasury's website that I mentioned, if you review the borrower information fact sheet, that will give you a summary, and it is pretty detailed about the eligible payroll expenses under the program. So for eligible payroll expenses, and I'll just kind of quickly bullet through this list, it includes salary, wages, commissions, or tips, though that figure is capped at $100,000 worth of salary. So if you have an employee whose salary is over $100,000, anything in excess of $100,000 for salary purposes has to be excluded from that calculation. So our first bucket is salaries, wages, commissions, and tips. Next, eligible list of expenses would be employee benefits. So that includes vacation, parental, family, medical, or sick leave. It includes healthcare and insurance benefits, and it also includes retirement benefits. State and local taxes assessed on compensation are included in your payroll calculation. What's not included, as I understand it at this point, are federal income tax or federal payroll taxes on the employer side. So on the employee side, those are included. On the employer side, your FICA taxes are not eligible to be included in your payroll calculation.
Lex, does any of that change if you're a self-employed, kind of single sole proprietor?
Yes, so that I believe is also on the same fact sheet. So for self-employed folks, it effectively is your net income. So Brad, I don't know if you want to follow up on that one at all in terms of more detail about independent contractors versus sole proprietors and self-employed folks.
Yeah, so far we've had guidance and there's some rules around sole proprietors if you file a Schedule C. We don't have as much information or experience on just a straight 1099 where you haven't filed a Schedule C for some reason. So that's a little hazy at the moment, but we can, if someone's got that situation, we can definitely help them out with that. One of the exclusions too, and just pardon me because we talk about this all day long, so we have a whole bunch of stuff in our head. Lex, I know one of the exclusions, which everyone here may be aware of and may affect you, is that you have to exclude any compensation of an employee whose principal residence is outside of the United States. I know there was a little bit of, I know the Maine delegation in particular was interested in that because of the seasonal workers coming in. I have not heard that anything beyond that has been resolved, so I believe that still stands today.
I believe that's right.
Okay. If you give someone a bonus every March or every April, would that be included in the salary piece?
I believe that would. So the salary, compensation, benefits, yes, there is a distinction here though between an owner's draw or a distribution for an LLC or a corporation and bonuses that you would make available to your employees as an employer. So, and we can explore that in some more detail, but your typical bonuses that would be available to your employees, those would be included within your eligible payroll calculation.
Okay.
Like I think a good rule of thumb is it's effectively gross wages is what you look at.
Right.
Under up to $100,000. I know Lex was talking about what taxes are included, what aren't, that sort of thing. It's gross wages. If you think about it that way, it's much easier than thinking about how withholding effects and things like that on the employee side.
Yeah.
And have you heard of any companies yet getting any money from either program so far? I know a lot of people were hoping that when they heard it was approved on the federal level, that money would go into bank accounts soon. We really haven't heard. I haven't heard anyone getting money so far. I'm just wondering if you.
Yes. So I've heard one of our brethren banks, I believe, did a press release that they had put a small amount out already. I can tell you that for us, I believe our first funds will start going out later today. And it'll snowball from there. It'll go quite quickly from there.
And I'll tell you one of the reasons, frankly, that funding had not occurred to date in any significant way is banks were waiting for guidance on the proper form for promissory notes and loan documents. Until we could get that guidance, there wasn't a lot we could do other than take a guess at what payment terms needed to be and how those loan documents needed to be drafted. We've got enough guidance now to start generating those loan documents and funding, but I would characterize the lag there as a lack of guidance on closing documents.
Yeah, it was muddy up over last weekend. Monday, the SBA district office and a couple of other district offices, Maine district office and a few others, specifically told banks not to close loans yet until the promissory note was done. We got a promissory note Tuesday night after hours. And it turned out to be the exact same note they used for other programs. So then there was a big hoo-ha around that's not really a new note. Should we really be using it? Because there's terms in there that don't apply. And then we got some more clarification yesterday. So it literally is kind of hour by hour, these things are getting settled and addressed.
Yeah, we've been hearing the same. I've been on a lot of different calls with both senators and with the state chambers and all different departments. And I think every single program we are hearing the exact same piece to it, is that just waiting on federal guidance to be able to put things in place. So I hear.
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you so if you watch the nightly White House updates that the money was coming, they were saying this for a couple of weeks. They said it would be ready on Friday. Like I said, we literally figured out how to access or got guidance on how to access the program on Friday. And I know some of the politicians were touting how much money went out or was approved on Friday. Just so you know, by the time we worked through everything on Friday, we were able to approve one application once we got through all the computer stuff. And we've got some pretty savvy people here on the processing side. So lots of times what we're hearing out there isn't really what's happening on Main Street.
Yeah, certainly. I know we have a few nonprofits on the line today. I wonder if you could speak to what differences there might be, if any, for the nonprofits.
Sure. So, and this is maybe a pretty good time to talk about eligibility for the paycheck loan. So I think most of you have heard if you are an employer with 500 or fewer employees, you are eligible. And that is a true statement. There are a few nuances to sort of break down under that rule. So maybe the first one I'll tackle is affiliation. And I guess first recommendation is I direct you to the Treasury site again, and there are rules about affiliated businesses, and generally that means businesses that are under common control or ownership. So the normal way that the SBA handles affiliated businesses is that they are aggregated together for purposes of calculating most things, whether it be revenue or whether it be employees. That is generally true for this paycheck loan. However, there are exceptions. So there are exceptions specifically for hoteliers, food service and restaurants, and a couple of other types of business. So what that means is if you operate a hotel and you operate that hotel under different company names and different locations, though you may have over 500 employees in your entire operation, including affiliates, you can break that out by particular business entity and particular location. So that's an important thing to know about that 500 rule. Nonprofits, as many of you know, are generally excluded from the definition of a small business under the SBA. That rule has been eliminated for this paycheck loan program. So as long as you qualify under the normal small business rules and that 500 employee threshold for an SBA program, the paycheck program, you're going to be eligible as a nonprofit.
Except if you're a 501c6.
Yes.
501c3.
And a 501c3. 501c3 is typically the structure for a nonprofit.
Yeah, we've been told C9s and C3s are accepted, but no C6s.
I'm not aware of that. So nonprofits are generally, Brad, I don't know if you know differently.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the interim rule. It's 501c3, these are eligible. 501c3, a tax-exempt veterans organization, 501c19, a tribal business concern described in 31B2C.
Yep, no C6s. Believe me, we've been going through this a lot as a C6, so.
And again, whether it's a nonprofit or for some other reason you're not eligible, talk to your bank, because the individual banks will have programs internally that they can address some of your needs. It's probably not going to include the loan forgiveness,
Yep.
But there's probably some good reasonable terms that you can get.
Yep, absolutely.
I would mention too, just quickly, if you are over 500, if you're an employer with over 500 employees, there are some alternate tests under the SBA rules based on revenue. So just because you're over 500 employees as a business, you'd want to check that to be sure that you couldn't be eligible for the paycheck loan under an alternative test. And again, that is described in the FAQs that were most recently published by the Treasury. And I believe, as Brad mentioned, that interim final rule published by the Treasury also includes information about those alternate eligibility tests.
Okay, we have another question here. If you have employees who are currently on furlough and you receive your money from the PPP, do you need to bring them back right away, or can you just increase the pay of the remaining employees?
So this does get into a forgiveness question. So I will tread lightly here, but tell you what I do know. And what I do know is based on again the Treasury guidance. So your forgiveness eligibility is going to be determined on a few things. First, they're going to look at the number of staff based on your application, your 2483, and that number of staff at the time of forgiveness. If your number of staff have decreased, that will whittle away at your eligible forgiveness amount. So that is one test that will be performed on your forgiveness. The other test is level of payroll. So if your level of payroll has decreased from the calculation period through your requested forgiveness date, that's also going to decrease your forgiveness amount. So there are two tests, at least, in determining eligibility. One is the number of employees, and the other is payroll amount. So both are relevant. Again, getting farther beyond that is kind of a forgiveness question that we're still a bit ambiguous on in terms of guidance.
Okay, Brad, Lex, are there any questions that we haven't answered yet that you thought people should be aware of? If there's any last minute questions, I would encourage everyone on here to throw them into the chat feature. I'd love to see a couple more.
I guess I would just a quick mention, though we don't have final rules about forgiveness. Some things we do know that you're going to want to be very careful about. So the test will be the 8 weeks following your close date, your fund date. So during that period, I would say it is imperative to keep meticulous records about what those loan proceeds are used for, and be sure that at the very least 75% of those proceeds are used towards payroll costs, and be very aware of what your staffing levels are and what the proceeds are being used towards payroll are. So meticulous records, so that at the time we go for the next round here in forgiveness, you can provide that documentation, you can make those certifications to us in the SBA, and those forgiveness amounts will be processed quickly.
Also on the forgiveness, just so you know, that the rate on that loan is 1%. That interest does accrue right from the date of the loan. However, part of the forgiveness is the interest as well. So it's complete forgiveness, principal and interest amounts due.
Okay. Well, I think that seems to have covered most of the questions. If you still have questions, I would ask you to send them along to me, and I will share them with Brad and Lex and see if we can get you some answers up. We have 2 last minute questions here. Are unemployment benefits included in any of the loan calculations?
My understanding is unemployment. So for an employee that is currently collecting unemployment, or a former employee that's currently collecting unemployment insurance? Guess I'm not sure. Brad, do you have thoughts on?
Yeah, so the unemployment, so on an individual basis, that I don't know how that would apply. I can tell you, if you have an employee that's on unemployment right now, the expectation, obviously, as soon as the loan is funded, that you're bringing them back onto your payroll and they're coming off unemployment.
How long do you have to activate employees? I've seen one date of June 30th, but how long do you have till you can bring them back?
So June 30th is the last date. What I would tell you is, because of this 8-week period, which is the time period under which forgiveness will be tested, you're going to want to make sure you have rehired staff and your payroll expenses are sufficient to support your forgiveness when that forgiveness request is made, which will be 8 weeks after your loan closes.
What if employees don't want to come back? I mean, some of them are doing okay right now with the extra $600.
It's going to affect the counts and the payroll numbers that Lex was talking about earlier. So it's a bit of a management issue if they don't come back, but you're not going to get the forgiveness that you were anticipating.
Okay. Okay. Is there a way, if you're already approved on your loan, to modify it if you need to modify the number of employees that you have listed?
So prior to funding, we have the ability to withdraw an application and reapply. So I've told you there's plenty of money. Just realize, so there's a teeny tiny risk that you're going to withdraw, and by the time we reapply, the funds are gone. I wouldn't worry about that. And chances are we can, again, with the pipeline going the way it is, we should probably be able to get it back in reasonably quickly. So yes.
I guess one other thing that came to mind that I've heard around, and ultimately this is a decision by you as business owners in making these applications. You represent on the 2483 that you are applying for this loan once. You're not applying for it through multiple institutions. So you are not eligible to have more than one paycheck loan. I've heard some reports in the news media and elsewhere about recommendations to apply to multiple banks at the same time, in the hopes that you'll just take the first approval. There is a risk in doing that. So make that choice for yourself, but be very aware of those representations you make on that 2483 about how you are going about applying for these paycheck loans.
Okay.
And that has happened to us. We do get something back from the SBA. They do know if you've applied somewhere else and been approved. So you get blocked from doing it. And just from a practical standpoint, everything I've talked about from volume standpoint, it potentially could clog up what we're trying to do for other people if you've already been approved at another institution.
Okay. Wow. Well, there's a lot to cover there, and I very much appreciate the time that everyone took this morning. And I especially want to thank Brad and Lex for really giving us a great overview and some really good details of this program. I have put my email in the chat box right now, so if anyone has any questions that I can forward on to Brad and Lex, please take advantage of that. And other than that, I just want to thank you both for being here, and thank you everyone for taking time today.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you.
We're going to record this and get it uploaded in the next hour or so. So please, absolutely keep an eye out for that, okay? Thank you.